versus Sabrina Limon. She's present in court with her attorney, Mr. Terry. People are represented by Mr. Smith. We do have Mr. Hearn still on the stand, subject to direct by Mr. Smith. He's accompanied by his attorney, Mr. Campbell. And we do have all 12 plus 4 in the box. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hope you enjoyed your day off yesterday. You've been such a good jury, I'm going to give you the next 2 days off. When we broke on Wednesday, Mr. Smith, you had just finished up with People's 52C. Jury did have a chance to hear that. I'll turn it back over to you, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Hearn, drawing your attention to the transcript from 52C, which was November 18, 2014 at 09:37 hours. Page 10, starting with line 9. You make the statement, you mentioned one glove and stuff. What was the significance of that statement?
The significance of that would have been just that typically when I was riding my motorcycle, I only drove with one glove on, just for my my right hand.
And subsequently, line 12, you say, because they obviously can't just prove the case straight up. What do you mean by that statement?
In the context, I was kind of formulating my thoughts on how they might have been constructing an investigation to make it appear as though I was their primary suspect, and to sort of present that in a form that I could explain as an alibi, or not as an alibi, but as an explanation to Sabrina, to maybe set her mind at ease that maybe they're just making things up that make it seem like I'm their suspect, even though they don't necessarily have much to go off of.
Moving on to page 11, you have a discussion with Ms. Limon about two perspectives versus a lot of perspectives. What were you speaking about? And this would be lines 6 through 15. What were you speaking about in that paragraph?
About hiring some legal help, as far as that would probably be beneficial to us at that point.
Okay. Starting on page 10, you state, when there's only two of us, there's only two opinions, two views, and there's lots of blind spots. And so when there's only two of us, we talk about it like, oh, I think we're safe. I think we're safe. I'll come over and yeah, I'll just park closer to the neighbors. What's the context of that statement?
Developing some of the things that I think we hadn't thought through all the way. Her and I would speak about things, but as far as us concealing both our affair and the crime, up to that point we hadn't done a very extraordinary job of it. And so I was referencing the fact that with only two people, there's going to be a lot of probably self-justification and a lot of blind spots, so that it would really be beneficial to have some outside perspective looking at us and giving us some advice to kind of realize whether or not our behavior was as suspicious as it seems like it was being portrayed by the investigation.
Okay. Well, the context of the statement, we talk about and in there, I think we're safe. Did you and Sabrina speak about whether or not you believed that you were safe from an investigation prior to these wiretaps beginning?
Certainly, with regard to this one, it's on the 18th. Certainly we had spoken exhaustively about that prior to this wiretap. Or was that the 17th?
Now, in the context of we're safe, was that in relation to the investigation into the murder of Robert Limon?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would request to play 52D at this time.
52D as in Delta 2.
Thank you.
The jury is knowledgeable and well advised how to treat a transcript. Mr. Smith, looks like everybody has a copy whenever you're registered.
Now playing November 18, 2014 at 10:42 hours.
Hello.
Hey, is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry for bothering you.
Oh no, hey, you've never been, so today is, you are not a bother.
Okay. Watch you again. I was just watching that video. You would love to take a video of you.
What's that?
I said, do you think that's just, I'm tripping. I have like such a bad headache too.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, what about the video?
I'm just tripping out on it. Just like, like I said,
Well,
hard to see, but it definitely doesn't look like the first suspect they had.
right, well, that's for them to worry about. If they have a video of me, that doesn't mean anything, you know? Just because it doesn't look like the first suspect, well, maybe that first person on that first video was just a person of interest, and that wasn't the actual person, you know? Like,
And I couldn't say, like, it's not like I was listening to, oh my gosh, like, it definitely makes better clarity than that other video, but,
did he send you a new video?
no, it's just been,
Oh,
and there should have been a liquor store somewhere. Like,
okay.
it's curious to see what that liquor store is like on that. You know?
Uh-huh. Yeah, huh. Well, so,
It's like the guy pauses when he goes down the aisle too, when he pauses.
does it, what are you tripping out about? Like whether or not, whether you should say, oh, it looks like Jonathan?
Do you think I should?
Well,
I think that they already, whatever it is.
I think they already made up their mind and they just wanted to see, like, I don't know, I might ask him, hey, do you have, could I see the video from, or could I see the picture you said that you could see his face and his nose? Because, like, I can't see his face, and that's the biggest thing, you know? Because just because they go down to just because they're following me around
Yeah.
and get a video of me somewhere, that doesn't mean anything. So, and I don't want it to mean anything necessarily. I want to be wise, of course, but I feel like if you have the one of the face, so I could see that, because then I could tell you for sure. And then if they have that, and if it is me, just say, oh yeah, that's Jonathan Hearn, and no way, dude, you're I know him, and he's not your suspect. Trust me, you know.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. thought you said we'll probably send me something else too, you know.
What's that?
I said we'll probably send me something else, he's obviously busy right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps. Are you thinking of asking for it?
What happened to what?
Like a picture of the face of her?
No, I was just asking, I was just seeing what you thought.
So that was after you wrote him back and said, like, no, this looks like a teenager, like I can't tell. He hasn't said anything back?
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
What do you think about that?
I kind of think, well, I mean, you and I both know what he's doing, but I kind of think, just to show him that you're not trying to be difficult, you know, maybe ask him, like, does he have a better picture that I can move or see, like going on the face?
Just text.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, just text and say,
Okay.
do you have the better one? Because that way you can show that you're not trying to be difficult, but then of course if he calls and says anything more or starts asking more questions, like, no, we're not interested, thank you, no.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Gosh, I just can't imagine that. But then again, I have to stop saying that because I just can't imagine any of this, you know.
Right.
The thing is just like it goes.
Neither can I.
To my sister, and she's always like, now that I have to go to this meeting, you know, and all, she'll have bigger problems in the world, you know, like, it does just make me think of, like,
Yeah.
gosh, you know, like, God is so good, and he just has a purpose, and he's not asking much, you know, just be good and love and take things and him as this gift of life, you know, and it's like, we get so run out on everything else, you know.
Yeah. You sure do.
This is so crazy, Jonathan. It's just,
What's that?
it's just so crazy, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, before you send that text, could I?
Oh, I just did.
Oh, you did? Okay. That's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Let me try to make some phone calls as far as that other stuff goes. Just because I don't want to get too far ahead on ourselves with talking to them, you know.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Yeah, I wish we could doing.
Oh, it's fine. It's totally fine.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
I love you, Sabrina.
I love you too, John.
Well, let's keep praying, okay? Don't give up the fight because our thinking is hard.
Okay.
God knows. God knows.
Okay.
I love you, baby.
Love you.
I love you. You're the sweetest and strongest girl I've ever known in my life, and I love you. I love you.
Thank you for loving me.
I do. I want to love you more and more and more. Oh, baby. Oh. If you need to, give me a call if you hear back from your kid.
Okay, I will.
I love you, Princess.
I love you too.
Find another.
Okay, thank you.
All right, 52D was played for the jury, Mr. Smith?
Mr. Hearn, about how long after this call were you arrested?
A few hours later.
You spoke about making some calls to lawyers. Did you do that?
I did.
I'm going to ask some questions about the day of your arrest. You had, I think, approximately $2,000 within some of your, within a backpack. Why did you have that much money with you that day?
You know, I had just recently cashed a check for some educational reimbursement from my department, and it was just incidental that I had not put that back in the bank yet.
Now, the gun that you had with you that you've already identified that's in evidence, was that your duty weapon as well?
It had not been approved by it's the San Bernardino County Sheriff Department who does the approvals of duty weapons for the investigators. And as I mentioned, I was just beginning as an investigator, so even though I could do investigations by myself, I was still essentially in a trainee status, so I didn't have an assigned duty weapon at that time.
Okay. Talk about prior to the murder of Robert Limon, when you would go visit Sabrina in Hellendale, were her children there?
Prior to his murder, no.
So, on what occasions, what would cause you to go to Hellendale? Was it during the school day? Was it in the evening when the children were gone, if you recall?
You're inquiring specifically as to where the children were?
Yes.
Oftentimes they were with a neighbor who had some children about their age who they did frequent sleepovers with. Otherwise, if it was during daytime hours, yes, it was just during school hours.
Okay. As to the time that you took the poisoned pudding over to Miss Limon's house, do you recall if that was during the day or at night?
You know, I've tried to recall. I don't recall exactly. I believe it was at night, but I can really only remember precisely that he was working the next day in Tehachapi during the daytime. So I'm not sure how that would have worked out as far as if he was working that night as well. I can't remember.
Okay.
Or that prior night.
If I could just have a moment, Your Honor. Let me draw your attention now to part of the spreadsheet that's already been admitted into evidence. It's People Exhibit 20. In relation to the date of August 17, 2014, the date that Robert was murdered. Do you recall speaking extensively with Miss Limon on that date? Over the phone?
I do.
Drawing your attention to the first line, what's labeled line 110, 760-987-3569. That is your phone, correct?
Yes.
Connected to 760-998-7958. That's Miss Limon's burner phone, for lack of a better term, correct?
Yes, sir.
The first call at 0640 for 34 minutes. Where were you when you made that call?
I would have been at work still.
That call lasted for 34 minutes. The next call at 8:11 that lasted for 33 minutes between the same parties. Where were you when you made that call?
Most likely on my commute home.
Next call, same parties, 8:47. That lasted 46 minutes. Do you recall where you're at during that conversation with Ms. Limon?
I believe I was at home.
At 10:07, same parties, 19-minute call. Do you recall where you were at?
I don't.
And then the last call of the morning at noon or 12:05 p.m. that lasted 80 minutes between you and Ms. Limon. Do you recall where you're at for that call?
Yes, I was at home.
Now, during these calls, did you discuss your preparations for going up to Tehachapi that day with Sabrina Limon?
Yes.
And then the last call on the list at 7:50 p.m. between the same parties, you and the Ms. Limon's phone, that lasted 10 minutes and 37 seconds. What was the content of that phone call?
She was initially worried about me, asked if I was okay, said that she had tried calling me several times and also had tried calling Rob several times, and neither of us had answered, so she was worried about how things had gone. I don't remember my exact words, but in essence and form, I said that I had done it and that things would be changing. Encouraged her to be strong and told her that I needed to get rid of some things that I had taken in that pseudo robbery attempt. And from the sound of it, she was kind of surprised that I hadn't already done that on my way home, but I expressed that I'd be getting rid of those things now. And it was pretty quick, well, 10 minutes, but I mean quick by our typical standards of conversation, and just let her know that I'd be communicating less in the next couple of days or over the next couple of weeks, just because of our previously discussed plan to do so. And but then we'd resume communication. You know, if she needed me or whatever, I was there.
Do you recall if you reiterated to Ms. Limon what she was to do in her contact with law enforcement?
In that conversation, no, we did not discuss that. We had discussed that previously.
Nothing further.
Terry.
Mr. Hearn, part of your deal with the prosecution to provide this testimony against Ms. Limon before your deal was consummated, you spoke to the police, is that right? Before you entered your plea?
That's correct, sir.
You spoke to them on January 3rd, is that right?
I believe so.
And that was the where you told them about the existence of this poison in the paint bucket. Is that right?
I spoke with them on a couple of different days. I don't remember which day I spoke mostly about the poison.
Well, they did the search of your residence on January 3rd, and that's when they found the poison from testimony we received previously.
you received that testimony, I would believe that.
Okay. Now, you also spoke to them on January 5th, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then again on January 7th of this year? Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then again on January 27th of this year. Is that right?
That sounds about right.
Okay. Now, all of these statements that you gave to the police and to Mr. Smith, with your lawyer present, all of those statements could not, as a part of your agreement, if you did not reach an agreement and did not have a plea deal, they couldn't be used against you. Right?
That was my understanding.
And all of this evidence that you told them about that you collected and had at your home for all this time, for over, well, now for 3 years, but at least at the time of 2.5 years, none of that evidence could be used against you, right?
Could you clarify that question?
Sure. All the things you told them about. The items in the storage shed, the chicken coop. All that evidence that you told them about. That couldn't be used against you if you did not reach a plea agreement. Is that right?
Something like that. I believe so, yes, sir.
Okay. With regards to the issue on the poison that you told them about, that evidence also is a part of your deal that your attorney worked out for you, is that they could not, if you didn't reach an agreement, you had to go to trial in your case, that Mr. Smith couldn't use that against you, right?
Yes, sir.
So, I'm a bit of a poker player. That's what we would call a free roll. In other words, you got a free shot at this without any consequence to you, right?
I'm not sure of the game of poker.
Well, with regards to this instance, all that information you gave the police, all the evidence that you told them about it, that they then discovered as a result of your information at your house, that point the finger at you, they couldn't use against you. Would that be correct?
It was my understanding that it could not be used against me initially.
Now, there's been talk about giving truthful testimony as part of your deal. Now, with regards to that, that's for the jury to decide if your testimony is truthful, right?
That's my understanding.
Okay. In other words, you can get up there and say whatever you want, as you've done in the past, and gotten away with it, and it's up to the jury to decide whether or not you're telling the truth now, right?
I would certainly hope so.
Yeah. The only way your deal gets undone is that if the DA, Mr. Smith, decides that you lied under oath. Is that right?
That would be one aspect that could potentially undo the deal, yes.
Now, I know Mr. Smith. I've known him for a long time now. And I don't believe that he would knowingly put on perjured testimony. So, I don't see him basically undoing the deal if he all of a sudden believes that you perjured yourself, because he's not going to put on perjured testimony, right?
I'm not sure of your question, sir.
Sure. In other words, it's up to Mr. Smith to decide whether or not he considers that you perjured yourself, right?
I would certainly assume so.
And you would agree that until January of this year, my client was not in custody until you talked to the police, right?
No, she was previously in custody.
And released when you were still in custody, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So until January of this year, when you spoke to the police and agreed to testify against her, That was when she was placed into custody, right?
I heard that, yes.
And you would also agree that all these phone calls that Mr. Smith has been playing for these last, feels like century, but the last few days were all phone calls that the police and Mr. Smith had back in November of 2014, right?
Yes, sir.
When you were arrested, right?
Yes, sir.
And when Ms. Limon was arrested and then released, right?
Yes, sir.
So you would agree that the only thing that's changed from what they had in November of 2014 to today's date is you. Would that be correct?
I cannot speak to their investigation.
Well, all the evidence that's been presented so far, other than you, has been about things that happened in 2014, 2013. And this is all evidence that they had at the time when you were arrested, based upon your review, I'm sure, of the evidence with your attorney during the course of your case over the 2.5 years you were in custody. Right?
I'm not sure which evidence has been presented so far, so I can't speak to anything beside my own testimony, sir.
But Ms. Limon wasn't arrested until after you talked to the police, is that right?
That's my
The second
understanding.
time.
That's my understanding.
And that's why she's here today, is because of you. Right?
I'm not sure.
Now, with regards to, I want to talk to you a little bit about your background and education. My understanding is having heard the testimony of your parents and your sister and you, is that you were homeschooled throughout your life. Is that right?
For K through 12, yes.
Yeah. And it was through a Christian studies homeschooling that your father was in charge of. Is that right? Or he was the head of?
He would file for the affidavit, but he was not in charge of any of the curriculum, no.
Okay, that was your mom?
No, it was an international company that produced curriculum.
I understand the curriculum, but your mother was your teacher, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And your father was the administrator of this program, right?
I guess you could call it that.
And I think previously you testified that you consider yourself a conservative Christian. Is that right?
I'm not sure if I've testified to that or not.
Well, at the preliminary hearing, isn't that what you said? You said you described yourself as a conservative Christian, did you not?
I don't recall if I used those words.
Page 139, counsel, lines 7 through 9 of the preliminary hearing transcript. If I may approach.
Please.
139 of the preliminary hearing transcript? See if that refreshes your recollection.
Yes, sir.
Do you remember testifying at the preliminary hearing that you considered yourself a conservative Christian?
No, sir.
You don't remember saying that?
I don't remember saying that.
Even after having read the transcript?
Yes, sir. That did not speak to what I considered myself.
How would you describe your religious upbringing?
Religious upbringing.
Okay. So you described yourself as a conservative Christian, did you not?
I did not.
That's not your answer? That wasn't your answer to that question. Is that what you're saying, sir? That you gave under oath at the preliminary hearing in this case, as you are supposedly testifying here today under oath. Correct? Isn't that what you said?
What's your question, sir?
Did you not testify at the preliminary hearing in this case when you were asked the following question at line 7, page 139? How would you describe your religious upbringing? Answer, conservative Christian. That was your testimony, was it not?
That was my testimony.
At the preliminary hearing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So your training and your education, if you will, from an early age was as a conservative Christian. Would that be accurate?
That would be accurate.
Because you attended a faith-based Christian homeschooling program, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And throughout your life, you were involved in your faith. Would that be accurate?
Loosely, yes.
Okay. You were loosely involved or you were involved?
That would be loosely accurate.
Did you attend church on a regular basis?
I did growing up.
Did you, on a regular basis, during the time when you were doing your studies throughout the time that you were in kindergarten through 12th grade, also do religious studies as part of the curriculum for the schooling you were receiving?
Yes.
And you continued on with your religious studies throughout your life, have you not?
I have.
Now, you've also previously testified that you didn't really believe, or you really weren't a true Christian. I think would be a way to put it, that you weren't that devout. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In other words, you mouthed the words. Is that right?
That would be a good characterization.
And throughout this, and that was that throughout your life? That you just mouthed the words with regards to your faith? In other words, you really didn't believe it?
You know, there were 2 or 3 times I remember feeling kind of maybe an excitement or sort of being energized by the tenets of the doctrine or faith. And I believe in sometimes there was a bit of devotion, but I can say probably from the age of 18 and onward, it was pretty artificial.
So at age 18, then onwards it became artificial and false?
Well, a disparity occurred between who I was and who I portrayed myself to be.
So you were successfully convincing others that you were still a true believer, if you will.
Sustained.
I'll rephrase. There's been your parents, both your mother and your father and your sister, all said that you were a devout Christian throughout your life.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this. Did you, during the course of your life, convince your parents, or try to convince your parents, that you really did have a devout faith when you didn't?
Yes.
In other words, you were successful. If they believed you were actually a devout Christian, you were successful in deceiving your own parents and your own sister who've known you their entire lives. Is that right? Or your entire life?
If they were to believe that I was a devout Christian in the times when I was not a devout Christian, that there certainly would be elements of deceit in that, yes, sir.
Well, throughout the time when you were seeing Sabrina, or were involved with Sabrina, your text messages, oftentimes you were talking about praying and praising God and all that. Was that all part of the act with regards to Sabrina too?
Which act, sir?
Well, were you using that devotion, if you will, with regards to your belief and your faith, were you using that to deceive Ms. Limon also? Like you deceived your parents?
Ms. Limon had the distinction of knowing that I was involved in an extramarital affair, pretty heavy drinking, and some other things. So perhaps she was less deceived.
Well, the whole time during the course of your relationship, you were constantly making references, biblical references, were you not?
Objection vague.
You understand the question, sir?
I think I do.
Oh, you can answer.
Sir, in the time that we've had these wiretaps, was a pretty narrow perspective of our relationship, which went all the way back to 2012. I think back in 2012 and 13, you would have heard less references to God during that time. Not saying that there were none, but less, certainly.
So, going back to 2013, you're saying you were less? There were less references to God and to praying in that time frame than there were in 2014.
To rephrase that.
Sure. You're saying that early on in the relationship there were not a lot of references to God. Is that right?
There were certainly less than we heard in the wiretaps.
Well, I understand that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm asking about early on in the relationship. Did you not also make references, biblical references, or talk about praying to God for forgiveness during the time frame of 2012 to 2013, before you murdered her husband?
Yes, we made some scriptural or faith-based references.
And at that time, that was when you were deceiving your parents and Ms. Limon with regard to your actual beliefs. Is that right?
You can rephrase that one, Mr. Cherry.
Well, this is deceiving your family with regards to your faith, right? That's what you testified to earlier, right?
Yes, I testified to that earlier.
And were you also deceiving Ms. Limon with regards to your true feelings about your faith?
No, sir.
That's Exhibit J, marked next in order.
I may approach.
Got J, Mr.
It is.
J as in Juliet.
Showing what's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit J. Mr. Hearn, do you recognize those notes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, these are notes that you wrote after you spoke to Rob Limon in 2013, right?
Yes, sir.
At the end of that, those notes, you've talked to Rob Limon and you've apologized for becoming involved with his wife. Is that right?
I had, yes, sir.
Okay. And because he confronted you and you'd spoken to him on the phone. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And these are notes you wrote after the fact. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is that a habit of yours? You write notes to yourself about things that have occurred, just occurred, or recently occurred?
Could you re-ask that question?
Sure, certainly can. Let me ask you this. Is this your habit to write notes to yourself about things that you have done or been involved in after the fact?
Perhaps.
Perhaps. Is that your answer, sir?
Yes, that's my
Okay.
answer, sir.
At least in this instance, this is something you'd already been through and already done, and you've written a note to yourself about something you've already been through and already done. Is that right?
It would seem so.
Okay. And at the end of that note, the last paragraph, you wrote the following: God, please control my wandering heart. Please grant me strength to stay away, to tell the truth, and be wise. Please help me to never play with matches. And then save their souls with exclamation marks after it, and heal their marriage. and you write, I messed up, I sinned, I am confessing and forsaking, save me, and please save them. Is that something you wrote in 2013 after you had a conversation with Rob Limon about being involved in a relationship with his wife?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, defense would move Exhibit J into evidence.
Objection, Mr. Smith.
No, Your Honor.
Repeat it.
So at least in 2013, you're praying because you'd sinned by having an affair with Ms. Limon, or being involved with Ms. Limon, right?
I think the first paragraph of that that note sets in good context exactly what I was repenting for. Yes.
And that was for having been involved with Ms. Limon because you knew she was married, and you were sinning, right?
Stated as an oversimplified way, yes, that. But there was other facets to it.
Well, you hadn't killed her husband yet, right? You hadn't murdered him yet, right?
I certainly had not.
And you certainly hadn't, at that point, discussed, even according to you, the idea of murdering her husband yet, right?
That had not come up.
But again, you're saying that at this time you didn't believe, or you were questioning your Christian beliefs. Is that right?
That's my retrospective analysis of my spiritual condition at that time.
Okay, so that's your perspective now as you're sitting here today, that as to what your spiritual status was in 2013. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Defense Exhibit K marked next in order.
K is in kilo,
Yes, if I may approach.
please.
Thank you, Mr. Terry.
Yes. Showing you what's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit K. Are those your handwritten notes? And there's two sides to that document, by the way, sir. Front
Thank you.
and back.
Yes, these are my handwritten notes.
Okay. Direct your attention to the front of the document. There's a number of references. Well, let me ask you this. Do you recall when you wrote these notes?
Sometime, I would say, probably late summer of 2013.
Okay. Again, this is before you decided to kill her husband, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you talk about, or your notes indicate references to sinful curiosity, is that right? One of the headers to your note, the note on the front.
Yes, sir.
The next was lust, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And the next is defeat, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then there's a reference, the next one is leaving room for Satan. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then the last one with a big asterisk in full caps is no vision. Spiritually, where do I want to be? Is that right?
That's what's written.
Okay. And then you've got an asterisk below that. It says, sexually gone further and survived. It's hard to see the toxicity of less. Is that right? Is that what you wrote?
Yes, sir.
And then you start referencing to your marriage, and you're talking about Sabrina's marriage. Is that right? Is this what this is about?
It was heavily based on Sabrina's marriage, but the note itself is somewhat of a flow chart or a collection of thoughts on the topic of compromise and those headers that you just read to me.
Okay. And then towards the bottom of the page, there's with God is honesty, vision, and freedom, right? So
Yes, sir.
some of the things you noted on there. Now, during the time that you and Sabrina were together and talking, a big portion of what you were talking with her about, and especially at the beginning of the relationship before you became involved sexually, you talked to her a lot about faith, is that right? And God.
Before we became involved sexually, no. We didn't speak a lot about that. She knew that I claimed to be a Christian, and I did reference faith a few times.
Well, did you, during the course of the time leading up to the point where you murdered her husband, make her feel guilty about their lifestyle? Or try to?
No, sir.
Well, didn't you indicate in your notes when you were these as a result of discussions that you had with Sabrina, or were these, in other words, you wrote them after you'd spoken to her, or were these things where you wrote them out and then spoke to her about it?
With respect to this note?
Yes.
This appears to be one that I wrote after having some conversations with her.
So again, these are notes that you're making to yourself after you've talked to Sabrina. Is that right?
Yes. Included in this note is a couple other things I wanted to clarify from her. These were the product of a lot of our conversations where I would ask her how she felt about certain aspects of their relationship, and I don't want to say was trying to pathologize their relationship, but was trying to gain a better understanding of her mindset, her background, how she had come to feel the way she had come to feel.
Well, then it'd be safe to say, I mean, you guys really, you got to know her life and her history intimately, right?
Quite.
During the length of your relationship, even from the very beginning when you guys were just talking, getting together and having coffee, those types of things, right?
Yes, sir.
So, and she talked freely about her life with her husband, right?
As the relationship progressed, yes.
She talked about her kids, right?
Yes.
She talked about her parents with you, right?
Yes. Yes.
And her siblings, her brothers and sisters.
Yes, sir.
And because she's a very, you would agree, very open and outgoing person, right?
She is very outgoing.
And you would also agree that she's very trusting, right?
Yes, sir.
And she trusted you, right?
In some ways, yes, seems so.
Well, she was talking to you constantly about her family, her marriage, her life in total, right? So you're intimately familiar with her entire life, right?
At what point, sir?
Well, during the course of your relationship, from beginning to end, you were intimately familiar with her life and her habits, right?
It was something that progressed over time, yes, sir. Initially, there wasn't a full revelation of all of her life, but well after we'd been in a relationship, she began to reveal more intimate details of some of the condition of her feelings, especially about her marriage.
And some of the things your notes indicate, I think it's the middle paragraph, your marriage was stronger, sorry, my eyes aren't what they used to be, was once stronger, and you write a note below that, where did you go wrong? Is that right?
I did.
Okay, and part of that was hiding the past, I think you said, or wrote in your notes?
Was that a question, sir?
Yes, sir. Was that something you wrote in your notes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Hiding struggles, you write that in your notes also, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And confession was absent. In other words, confession with regards to your sins or confession with regards to the problems within the marriage. What are we talking about there when you make that note?
You know, these 3 points were specifically gathered from a few friends of mine who've had extramarital affairs, and the recognition that these are some commonly occurring terms of their marriage, and part of what causes sort of a fissure in their relationships.
And one of the things you also indicate was forgotten or no fear of God. And that's off to the side, is it not?
Yeah, it appears to be.
Now, on the back side of this particular note, you wrote down a number of passages within the Bible. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Were those passages that you were going to indicate to Sabrina that she should read?
I don't recall at this time.
This time you're not asked to move the defense exhibit K into evidence.
Objections?
None, Your Honor.
Will be admitted.
So at that time, your faith was still in question as you look back at it now. Is that right?
You know, last time you asked me that question, I agreed to it as far as saying that my faith was in question. I think that's a misrepresentation. At that time, I was not questioning my faith. There was a major discrepancy between the tenets of the faith that I said that I belonged to and my actual lifestyle. For instance, the tenets of good doctrine of Christian faith would say to love each other or to do someone no harm. Certainly I was having an extramarital affair. I was hurting a lot of lives. And so therein is the discrepancy.
But you've testified here that now, as you look back in hindsight, that you, at that time, really didn't believe. Is that right?
Essentially, based upon the supposition that belief will eventually manifest in someone's actions.
Defense Exhibit L, marked next in order.
L is in Lima.
I may approach, Your Honor. Sir, I'm going to show you who's marked as Defense Exhibit L.
Thank you, sir.
You recognize that note?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and that's dated April 6th of 2013, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And again, this is referencing with regards to Sabrina, is that right?
It's a journal entry of sorts on the topic of Sabrina.
Okay. And you indicate that her husband had called at approximately 10:02 p.m., is that right?
Yes, sir.
You were waking up and scared to death, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, you indicate in your note here that you wrote on April 6th of 2013 that you told Robert Limon that you didn't know Sabrina was married, right?
Based upon the context of the note, yes.
But Sabrina had told you she was married, right?
She had eventually.
Well, certainly before you got the call from her husband, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you'd already, by then, already seen and met her husband when you were at Beef O'Brady's in March of 2013, right?
Yes, sir.
So you knew at the time that she was married, but you lied to Mr. Limon. Is that right?
Yes, and that would be why I referenced it as a lie in the journal entry.
Okay, but again, this is something that you wrote after the fact. Is that right?
What fact, sir?
Well, after you'd spoken to Robert Limon.
Yes, sir.
His wife.
Yes, sir.
Okay. At this time, I move defense exhibit K and evidence, Your Honor.
Any objection?
None, Your Honor.
You mean L, Mr. Smith? Or Mr. Terry?
Did I say K?
You did.
I'm sorry, it should be L.
Absolutely.
Did I give you the wrong one? I did. Okay, I'm good. Thank you. I'm sorry. Defense exhibit L.
It's not like we only had one thing marked in this trial, Mr. Terry.
Oh,
Go
what
ahead.
did I say, Your Honor?
and Mike, please.
Mr. Hearn, you recognize these notes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, these notes in relationship to your work-related activities?
These were notes from a conference, yes, related to emergency response, paramedicine, firefighting, and police work.
Okay. And were these notes that you were taking at the time that you were hearing or listening to the speaker?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these weren't things that you wrote ahead of time. These were things that you wrote as you were hearing them, or in some instances after you heard them, right?
Yes, after I heard them.
Defense exhibit M is evidence.
Any objections? It'd be admitted.
Defense exhibit N, ordinance of order.
Defense exhibit
And
N as in November.
Mr. Hearn, do you recognize these notes?
Yes.
When do you write these notes, if you recall?
I don't recall.
Okay. Would it be safe to say these are notes that you are making in your journal, as you call it, or to yourself? Is that right?
Yes, presumably around 2010.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that you're doing notes either contemporaneous or at the same time as events are happening, or shortly thereafter, on a fairly regular basis, right?
It seems so, yes.
Okay. And again, in this one, you reference to your needing to look forward to time with God. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you talk about there are lost souls that need saving. Christian witness. Is that right?
I wrote that, yes.
Okay. Is that referencing your needing to be a Christian witness and save souls?
Based on the context, it was something that I needed to be working on, yes.
So that was a big. I mean, certainly there's a sort of a similar theme throughout. Is everything seems to be about your faith. Is that accurate? Or your beliefs?
You said everything seems to be about my faith?
A lot of your notes reference to being right with God, if you will, and being involved in your faith. Would that be accurate?
Certainly.
Okay. All right, move defense exhibit N into evidence.
The objection should be admitted.
Defense exhibit O, mark next in order.
Action order defense exhibit O is in Oscar.
I approach. Mr. Hearn, I'm showing you what's been marked as defense exhibit O. You recognize that note?
No, sir.
It's not your handwriting.
No, sir.
Dated January 3rd of 2015. Is that right?
It appears to be.
You know where this note came from?
I was incarcerated at that time, so it was not made by me or anyone around me that I know of.
Did you produce or give to the district attorney or the police any notes that you had in your possession from when you were incarcerated?
I'm sorry, could you repeat
Sure.
that question?
Since the time you were incarcerated in November of 2014 until today's date, have you given any notes that you had in your possession while you were incarcerated to either the district attorney or to the Kern County Sheriff's Department?
Not that I know of.
Mr. Terry, is that a good spot for
It's a
me?
good spot, Your Honor.
10:45. Remember not to form or express any opinion or discuss the case. We'll see you back at 10:45. back on the record, excuse me, People versus Limon. She's present in court with her attorneys and people represented. We do have Mr. Hearn still on the stand, subject to cross by Mr. Terry, and I'll vote those four in the box. Mr. Terry, whenever you're ready.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Hearn, kind of going back to your education, but turning to more secular issues. If I understand correctly from the testimony of your family and from you, you completed high school and was it associate's degrees at the same time when you turned 18? Is that right?
Yes, the associate's degree was just after my high school diploma.
Okay. When did you actually get your high school diploma?
I believe it was winter of 2007, and then I believe my associate's was in 2008.
Okay, so about a year later?
I think it was a matter of 1 or 2 semesters, yes.
So while you were going to high school, you were also working on associate's degrees, is that right?
As well as middle school, yes.
Okay. So you started working on an associate's degree when you were in middle school?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And about what grade did you start working on an associate's degree while you were in middle school?
I was 12 when I first went to college, or first took some concurrently enrolled classes.
Okay. So what I think I'm going way back in Stone Age is what we used to call advanced placement type of things. Would that be accurate?
I believe my first couple classes at college were just vocational type education, so I was allowed by the dean of the college to go there without any sort of advanced placement. It was just vocational type college classes.
And were those related to the construction arena?
They were.
And that's sort of what your family business is. Is that right? Your father's work?
Yes.
Okay. He's in construction. Is that right?
He's now on the city side, but yes, he's in the construction industry.
And at the time you were going to school, did he have his own company?
He was working for local city government, and also he was one of the adjunct instructors at that college, and so some of those things paved the way for me to begin taking classes at that time. That was originally my degree path, was towards construction.
And when did you begin your studies with regards to, I'll call it fire sciences? Is that the arena we're talking about, that particular area?
Yes, sir. That would have been in when I was 17 years old.
And at that time, too, were you doing, the same time, were you doing studies with regards to becoming a paramedic?
That was shortly after that time. A typical degree or career path in the fire technology field is to attend EMT training, which is the basic level of EMT, and then to go on to fire academy, take a number of certificate classes, finish degree work, and then most departments in Southern California require people to be a paramedic as well, which requires quite a bit of time of experience as an EMT, working in the field on an ambulance, and then to go on to paramedic school. So I didn't attend paramedic school till 2010. I was 20 years old.
And prior to that, were you working as an EMT on an ambulance?
I did. I worked for San Bernardino County Fire Department, which had a ambulance service as well as part of the county service.
And when we're talking about EMT, that stands for Emergency Medical Technician, is that right?
Yes.
Which is a step below a paramedic, is that right?
An EMT basic is a step below a paramedic. Yes, sir.
And when you were working for San Bernardino County Fire Department as an EMT, you were, I think you said, about 18 years old. Is that right?
I was first hired when I was 18, and then put on full time right around my 19th birthday in a limited term capacity.
Extra help type of thing?
They called it limited term, meaning just like a politician would have a 4-year term limit after 4 years, even though you're working full time and assigned to a regular fire engine and schedule. After 4 years, your position is eliminated. It kind of increases the likelihood of you going to a either union spot or to a different department.
Now, when did you become a full paramedic?
I believe I was nationally registered 20 years old, just before my 21st birthday, and then state and county registry right around the time I turned 21, February of 2011.
And why you then shortly thereafter did you then become a limited term firefighter with San Bernardino County, or was it the whole time you were there, was it just as a paramedic?
Sir, I was hired as a firefighter EMT basic. Sorry, it was a kind of a bringing together of both those titles. I had already finished my fire academy, so I worked on a fire engine and also rotated onto an ambulance. I was working in a full capacity, full-time as a firefighter and also as an EMT. While I was working there, I broke away to go to paramedic school, still working a full-time schedule though. Upon completion of my paramedic school, I tested for a limited term firefighter paramedic position, which essentially is then just that one step up in pay and also in responsibilities. So I was still a limited term firefighter working on an engine, but also was now licensed as a paramedic and working on ambulances, now in charge of the ambulance, I guess you could say.
Okay, so that was still when you were with San Bernardino County Fire?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's when you met Jason Bernatine. Is that right?
I met him through my work there, initially as a volunteer when I was 17.
And then throughout the time that you were a limited term firefighter EMT, did you work with him also?
I did on a few occasions. I know I did primarily when I was a limited term firefighter paramedic, because of the position that was open on his shift required you to be a paramedic for that spot.
Okay. And with regard to how old were you when you started working as a limited term paramedic / firefighter with San Bernardino County Fire Department?
21.
Oh. Now you're doing a lot at a very young age. You've already accomplished quite a bit and then become a firefighter, paramedic by the time you're 21. Is that right?
Yes, sir, I had.
Okay. And you're working at San Bernardino County Fire Department, and on occasion when you're a paramedic at age 21, you've known Jason Bernatine by then approximately 4 years. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let me ask you this. How many female firefighters did you work with at San Bernardino County Fire Department?
I believe there were about 4.
Okay. Did you personally work with them?
On overtime basis.
Okay. And firefighters, it's kind of a macho profession, right?
It could be viewed as that, yes.
Well, that's what most firefighters look at themselves as, don't they?
Certainly.
And that was the profession you were in, right?
Yes.
Okay. And having been around during the course of my life, football players and police officers and firefighters, being a macho profession, there's a lot of locker room talk, right?
Provided there's a locker room.
There's a lot of talk about your personal lives. Would that be accurate?
Definitely.
And certainly because they're macho professions, they tend to talk about their sex lives, right?
Some of them do, yes.
Their conquests, if you will. Would that be accurate?
I'm not sure of your question.
Sure. Would they tend to talk about their conquests with regards to their relationships with women?
Some of them certainly do.
Okay. And Jason Bernatine obviously was one of those, wasn't he?
No, sir.
Oh, did never talk about his life?
He did speak about his life.
Okay. And he never talked about his engaging in swinging, if you will, with you at any time?
I don't believe he did.
Now, how long after you were at San Bernardino County Fire Department was it before you started at Redlands Fire Department?
I did resign from San Bernardino County to go begin work at Redlands in early 2012.
At what point in time did you begin your classes to become an arson investigator?
I believe that was in 2013 was when I began, after I'd finished the probationary period for Redlands Fire Department.
And how long was the probationary period for Redlands?
I'm sorry, 1 year.
1 year? And you started in 2012?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So in 2013, do you remember approximately when it was you started taking these classes with regards to becoming an arson investigator?
I believe it was in the spring semester of 2013.
Okay. And that spring usually starts January or February and goes to May or June, right?
I believe so.
And part of your training with regards to arson investigation was obviously investigating sources of the blaze, what's the cause, those types of things, right?
Yes, sir.
Part of it was also firearms training, right?
Yes, sir.
Where you were out on the range, learning how to use a handgun and other weapons. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. For example, such things as AR-15s and those types of things also, right?
Depending on one's level, they could be trained to that level. I only was required just the handgun training.
And part of the training you also received was on testifying in court, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And there were certain things that you noted that to do when you were testifying. Is that right?
I believe I noted some of those things.
Did the key mark next in order?
It's approaching with P as in Papa.
Mr. Hearn, showing what's been previously marked as Defense Exhibit P, Are those notes that you took with regards to report writing and testifying in court?
It appears to be.
Okay. Now, this was part of your training as an arson investigator, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And with regards to that, part of the training is in writing a report and documenting your findings. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And part of the training you received was how to testify in court, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And some of your notes indicate that you were taught to listen to the entire question. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then you were also taught to pause before you answered, right?
Yes, sir.
And then one of the other things you were taught was when you talk to answer the question succinctly, and then after you've answered the question to then stop, right?
I believe so based on my notes.
Okay. And then below that, there's things about trick questions. Is that right?
There's those two words, yes.
Well, that's a note you made at the time when you were involved in your training, right?
Yes, sir.
And then it lists all below that the possible objections that can be raised by counsel, and if you're testifying for the prosecution, by him or by the defense counsel, right?
I think you described it more exhaustively than I was aware of, but yes, something along those lines.
Okay. Well, you received this training when you were training to become an arson investigator. You were taught how to testify, right?
It was a very small component of our training, yes.
Well, if you're doing arson investigations, ultimately, would you not agree, if your findings is that it was a result of arson, that you potentially would be testifying in a courtroom such as you are now with regards to your findings as an arson investigator?
I'm sorry, I wasn't able to follow your question.
Okay, I'll restate it. As an arson investigator, if you're going to be testifying about your findings, that's part of what you were trained to do, right?
I was trained to testify, yes.
Much like you are here today, right?
Objection argumentative.
Sustained.
Well, you've certainly had training with regards to testifying. You've certainly had more training as to testifying than, say, the average civilian, right?
Probably 2 or 3 hours of more training, yes.
Now, beginning of your first acquaintance with Sabrina, you met her at Costco, I believe you said, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was when I think you said you were shopping for your station house, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And you saw her and she was doing the promotional
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you in uniform at that time?
I believe I had either a hat or some sort of fire department related shirt on, but I was not in uniform.
Okay. And you approached her and struck up a conversation with her, is that right?
No, she struck up a conversation with me, and I did converse with her at that time.
Okay. And one of the things you discussed when you first met her that day was she recognized that you were a firefighter. Is that right? Or she inquired as to whether or not you were a firefighter?
The latter.
Okay. And she also told you that she knew someone else who was a firefighter and referenced Jason Bernatine. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then did she ask you if you were going to go to the fire? There was a party by firefighters that was going to be happening shortly thereafter. Did she ask you if you were going to be attending that?
No, that was on a later visit to Costco, one of my subsequent visits that she asked me about that.
So the first time you met her, she didn't give you her phone number, right? That's
correct.
It was when you met her at a subsequent time, and it was regarding the firefighters' party. Is that right?
Yes, that was the topic we were last discussing.
And she gave you her phone number, and you began calling her and texting her shortly after she gave you that phone number. Is that right?
I believe so.
And you called her multiple times during that time frame. Is that right?
Which time frame?
After you got her phone number, you called her multiple times before the party, correct?
Mr. Terry, I didn't end up attending the party, so I don't know when that time frame was, but I know that after getting her phone number, I did speak with her.
Okay. And then after you called her a number of times, then you texted her and confirmed that she was married, right?
I definitely know. I remember having the conversation with her on the phone with respect to her being married.
Now, you remember approximately what time frame we're talking about? It obviously was in sometime in 2012, right?
Yes, sir. It would have been within a week or two after I got her number, and I got her number on the third visit that I had been to Costco and seen her. So I would say it was probably 4 or 5 weeks after the first time I met her.
Now, in March of 2013, that's when you went to Beef O'Brady's along with some other firefighters. Is that right?
Yes, there were a few firefighters there.
And were you already there at the time that Sabrina and Jason and Sabrina's husband, Robert, arrived at Beef O'Brady's?
I was.
Okay. And during the course of the evening, you were socializing with Jason Bernatine, is that right?
Among others.
Along with other people, and is that right?
Yes, sir.
And by then you'd already knew Sabrina and spoken with her, is that right?
Certainly more than spoken to her, yes.
Well, had you already, by the time you saw her at Beef O'Brady's, already begun your sexual
Yes, sir.
So by the end of 2012, you'd already begun your affair with Sabrina Limon?
Yes, sir.
Now, was it before Beef O'Brady's or was it after Beef O'Brady's that you began texting and calling Jason Bernstein and showering with all these compliments that he talked about?
I'm not sure which compliments he spoke of.
Well, did you give him the impression that you were interested in him?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you constantly call him and leave him messages or text him leaving him messages talking about how great a guy he was?
No, sir.
Let me ask you this. I saw from the photos that Mr. Smith moved into evidence from that night. You were drinking along with pretty much everybody else, right?
Pretty much everyone else.
Okay. And you met Kelly Bernstein that night too? Or had you known her before?
I had met her before. I didn't know her well.
Okay. But you saw her there that night?
I did.
Okay. And she was drinking?
She was.
Okay. And at some point, as the night was over, did you see her and Sabrina leaving Beef O'Brady's that night?
I saw their entire caravan leaving, yes.
Okay.
There was a number of couples.
Okay. Was Kelly with Sabrina that night? In her car?
I believe they were.
Okay. And you remember Kelly flashing you as they were leaving?
I don't recollect that.
Now earlier, in your testimony, you said initially you and Sabrina would get together for coffee. Is that right?
In my prior testimony, I did mention that once we were going to get together, and Sabrina kind of went out of her way to arrive ahead of time, and she had purchased us coffee. So yeah, we enjoyed that coffee together on one of our outings.
Well, initially it wasn't a sexual liaison, though, right? When you first were meeting with Sabrina, right? That developed over time, didn't it?
That did.
Okay. So initially when you were meeting with her, it was at coffee shops or restaurants, something along those lines, just to talk, right?
No, sir. It was in our vehicle, in her vehicle or in my vehicle, at kind of a somewhat scenic point in our area.
Oh, okay. So initially you were just kind of talking, and she was talking about her life, and you were talking about your life. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And over time, she told you, as we talked about earlier, as you got to know each other better and got to your relationship began to develop more, you found common grounds with regards to things like your faith. Is that right?
I guess you could say that.
Well, those are things that you could talk about, the two of you, since it was something that she also was interested in and was exploring herself, right?
After we had already kind of become intimate, I do remember asking her about her faith, but it wasn't one of the foundation pieces of our initial relationship. I would say that was paved more so with conversations just about life, her family, music, some of our shared interests, some probably pretty flirtatious stuff back and forth.
And your discussions eventually turned to her husband, right?
They did at times.
Talked about her family, her children, right?
Yes, sir.
And eventually she opened up to you about her open marriage with her husband, right?
Eventually she did.
When you say eventually, when did this occur?
Before we had began a sexual relationship, in conversation with her one night, I asked her the question, so are you and Robert swingers? Because she was mentioning some of her friend group, and I recognized some of them as some coworkers and other people I knew who were involved in sort of open relationship. And so I was suspecting that if they were spending time together, she would be in that group. I asked her if she was a swinger, and she said, oh, no, they definitely denied that. And but then in time, I asked the question a number of times and in different ways, trying to, I guess, develop where her emotional neglect had come from. And eventually she did tell me that they were swingers, and this was probably well after I'd been confronted by Robert. I would say probably a month or so after I was confronted by Robert initially.
You found out that she was involved in the swingers group, I think you said with coworkers. Is that right? What coworkers are we talking about?
She mentioned a couple names, not all of which I recall at this time, and those were people at that time that I suspected to be involved with each other.
Well, you can't remember the coworkers that she mentioned that you knew were swingers at this time. Is that right?
Not all of the names.
You don't remember all the names?
That's correct. I do not recall all of the names.
Okay. Well, with regards to the names that she supposedly mentioned that you recognize other than Jason Bernatine, who else did she mention who you worked with?
She mentioned a captain I had worked with previously, Captain Rowe, and his wife or estranged wife, Teresa. She mentioned another captain whose name I can't recall right now. Another captain, Captain Henry. No, correction. She mentioned Captain Henry sometime later. But anyways, when she mentioned Captain Rowe and his estranged wife, Teresa, they were two that I then correlated her to, that was what prompted me to ask the question.
You're saying that there were that many firefighters you worked
Sir, San Bernardino County Fire Department has, I want to say it was 500 and something firefighters, so it was accounted for a very, very small percentage.
Okay, I understand that, but I'm saying you knew about it, and I thought there wasn't locker room talk.
Objection, misstates the testimony.
Well,
Overruled. You can
Okay.
answer, Mr. Hearn.
I didn't hear the question.
Sure.
One more time, Mr. Terry.
Yes. That you heard of when you were working in San Bernardino County Fire Departments, you heard about these individuals as being involved in swinging. But I thought you testified earlier there was no locker room talk or with regards to sexual conquest.
I don't believe I said that, sir.
During the course of once you found out that Rob and Sabrina had an open marriage, you also found out that she'd previously been involved with someone by the name of Dale Smith. Is that right?
I do recall the first name, yes.
Well, you testified earlier that he was one of her former lovers, I think you said, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you knew about her relationship, or that she'd had a relationship with Dale Smith, right?
She told me about that, yes.
Okay. And you were familiar that she made you aware that he was also part of the swingers group, right?
To some capacity, yes.
And she also informed you that she was involved in a relationship with him while she was married with Rob, right?
Both sexual and emotional, yes.
And also, Rob knew about their relationship, right?
Yes.
And when you say it was both sexual and emotional, it was when Mr. Smith, from what you understand, was going through a divorce and Sabrina was there to give him support, right?
I guess you could call it support.
Well, you said it was emotional, so she was giving him emotional support, right?
Certainly.
Okay. Now, in approximately March or April of 2013, you began to feel guilty about your relationship with Sabrina. Is that right?
Once again, yes.
Okay. And you contacted Jason Bernatine to get Rob's phone number, right?
Yes.
And then when you asked for that, Jason said, well, Rob's right here, right?
Something to that effect.
And he gave the phone to Rob Limon, right?
No, sir. Rob called me a few minutes later, probably 10 minutes later.
And you spoke to him about your relationship with Sabrina, right?
Yes, sir.
And he told you to
He did.
And he told you not to go to Costco again, right?
Something to that effect.
But you didn't stay away from his wife, right?
Unfortunately.
And you kept going to Costco to see her, didn't you?
I went to Costco for other things.
Well, you also were going to see Sabrina, right?
I definitely saw her at Costco as well.
And you didn't break off the relationship, right?
Unfortunately not.
In fact, there were times where you actually went to Costco and you would watch Sabrina from another aisle, right? When she interacted with other people, right?
No, sir.
Weren't you there watching her sometimes? And in fact, one time when her husband and children came in and then you took off?
Thank you. Correction, if I may correct my testimony. Once I was coming to Costco and going about shopping, I had already gotten some things, and I was approaching the aisle, the end of one aisle, and saw that she was on an upcoming aisle. And at that time, around that time, I heard some kids' voices, and presumably those were Robbie and Leanna's. And then I saw Robert walking up and talking to Sabrina, and so I went ahead and left my cart where it was and left the store.
So you were there and you were watching her and you saw Rob and the kids come up, right?
Watching as in using my eyes, yes, but not in some surveillance capacity.
You weren't stalking her then?
That would be an accurate way to put it.
Now, throughout 2013, even though Rob asked you to stay away from her, even though you were feeling obvious guilt over your relationship with Sabrina, you continued to pursue her, right?
Yes, sir.
And all the way through into 2014, even though you were suffering from all this guilt from being involved in an extramarital affair with a married woman, you continued to pursue Sabrina, right?
I continued to see her, yes.
Well, you continued to pursue her and keep in contact with her continuously, right?
Mr. Terry, you might want to explain the term pursuit.
Did you continue to see her at Costco regularly in 2013 and into 2014?
Certainly semi-regularly as a part of my job.
Did you continue to constantly call her from 2013 through 2014?
There was continuous communication, her calling me, me calling her.
Did you continue to call or text her throughout 2013 and 2014?
Yes, sir.
Did you continue to see her when time allowed, between your schedule, hers, and her kids, to see her personally?
Yes, sir.
despite having been asked not to by her husband, and your guilt. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
In 2014, March of 2014, or prior to that, had you been communicating with Sabrina via Gmail accounts that you had set up?
Yes, sir.
And at some point, did Rob Limon contact you because he discovered the communications between you and his wife?
He did.
And that was in approximately when in March of 2014, if you can remember?
I can't. The nearest I could give you was that it was early 2014.
Well, it certainly was before you went and purchased a pay-as-you-go phone to give to Sabrina so you could continue communicating with her, right?
It was before I purchased that phone.
Now, you testified previously that it was through this Gmail, let me ask you this, was it 2 different accounts that you set up that you were sending emails to each other back and forth?
It was 2 different accounts, however, at different times. The first account, we would send the message essentially to itself, to the one account. However, I think Gmail eventually suspected some sort of scam with an email address that was only ever emailing itself frequently, and so they shut down the one, and then we started a second one and continued in the same manner.
Okay, so you would send an email to that same account that she had access to that was addressed basically to the same account.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Rather than an account where you had an account, she had an account.
That's
right?
correct.
Okay. And was this an account that you accessed on your phone?
It was.
And it was actually an email address then that you set up, 2 different ones, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And was this was, when did you start and set up these Gmail accounts? What time frame are we talking about?
I believe it was set up in December of 2013.
Okay, so from December of 2013 until March or sometime possibly beginning of April of 2014, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Was it in these accounts that you purportedly had discussions about poisoning Robert?
There may have been a few brief lines of dialogue about the killing of Robert in those Gmail accounts. It was certainly something I was concerned about because of the time frame. I know that was something we were discussing around that time.
Well, didn't you testify at the preliminary hearing that Robert found the Gmail accounts and then you deleted all the emails because you were concerned that Robert would see the ones where you supposedly were talking to Sabrina about poisoning Robert? Isn't that what you testified to at the prelim?
I believe so, and I believe that was my concern.
Now, we've seen the exhibits that the district attorney has brought forth where they actually found your web searches referencing pudding, making pudding, right? We've seen those exhibits that the people have introduced.
Yes, sir.
Okay. We've seen exhibits where they did saw the web searches related to you doing searches about arsenic poisoning, right?
Yes, sir.
We've seen web searches about getting, how long does it take BNSF Railroad to make a payout, right? Settlements, right?
We have.
So the DA and the police have been able to find all your web searches with regards to different things that you would researched, right?
That's my understanding.
But they couldn't find any of these emails at all that talk about, between you and Sabrina, talking about killing her husband?
I cannot speak for their investigation.
Well, I would assume, since they did so much work to get those web searches and retrieving that metadata from those web searches, that they would have turned over these emails you deleted, right?
If you would like to assume that.
Well, wouldn't that make sense to you if they actually existed?
That they would present them here?
Yes, sir.
That would seem reasonable.
Did they present any of those to you during your testimony, sir?
No, sir.
That's a good place to break it up. I can't tell the time.
It's 15 minutes,
Oh,
Mr. Terry.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Couldn't see the clock.
We're gonna keep chopping for 15 more minutes.
I apologize.
That's all right.
They're off the clock for me. Now, there was a break in time between when you spoke to Robert about the Gmails, right? And before you provided Sabrina with the paid for, what's been called a burner phone, if you will. Is that right?
To clarify that sequence, he spoke to me addressing the Gmail accounts. I tried purchasing a couple alternate lines at that time. None of those worked. I think I purchased 2 different phones. Neither of those had coverage out in her area. However, within the week, Sabrina and I continued communicating just on her home phone and on her personal cell phone. So there was no burner required for that time period.
We're still calling her personal cell phone at that time?
Yes, her personal phone and her home phone. It wasn't until the arsenic attempt, I guess you could say, the end of April, that I purchased the actual Verizon burner phone that had coverage in her area.
Now, did you purchase that, in looking at the records that have been produced by the prosecution in this case, it appears that you purchased, or the phone was purchased from the Folsom area. Is that accurate?
No, sir.
You don't remember where you purchased this pay-as-you-go phone?
Which one?
You don't remember where you purchased this pay-as-you-go phone?
Which pay-as-you-go phone? The one after the arsenic attempt?
The one that you provided to her in April of 2014.
I believe I purchased it at a local Target.
Now, when you purchased the pay-as-you-go phone, or as you called it, burner phone, for Sabrina, so that you could communicate with her without Rob knowing about it, since he found the Gmail account, right?
I'm not sure of your question.
Sure. You purchased the phone for Sabrina to talk to you because Rob had found the Gmail account and you wanted to communicate with her without him knowing, right?
As I said, I purchased, I believe, 2 burner phones around that time when he discovered the Gmail account. We attempted to use those maybe once or twice and then discarded those and went back to using her personal cell phone and her home phone.
And when you purchased the one that actually did work,
Yes, sir.
that we're talking about, you only purchased the one for her. Is that right?
That's correct.
You continued to use your own cell phone to communicate with Sabrina on the throwaway phone. Or the burner phone, as it's called, you guys have been calling it. Would that be accurate?
Yes, sir.
You didn't buy your own burner phone to use to communicate with Sabrina? Is that right?
That's correct.
So with regards to this burner phone, pretty much all the calls were from you, right?
I can't speak to the call load.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think Sabrina would call her husband with that phone?
Oh, I understand your question now. No, certainly it was just to provide a means of communication between her and I.
But you said it was so to hide your plan to poison her husband. Is that accurate?
No, sir. It was to give us a couple months buffer between essentially eliminating any sort of communication on her personal cell phone. If the sheriff's department was to query her phone records, they wouldn't see my phone number show up in her personal cell phone for any time in the last 3 or 4 months before we attempted on his life again.
Okay. But by the time that you were getting this burner phone that you gave to Sabrina, the people who already knew that you and Sabrina were involved in an extramarital affair included her husband, right?
He knew.
Jason Bernatine, right?
He knew to some degree that we had some sort of intimacy.
Well, didn't Jason specifically tell you to stay away from Sabrina?
Somewhere around that time, yes.
So they were aware of it at the time that you say you were planning to kill her husband. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And if they were aware of it, certainly Jason would begin to suspect you if all of a sudden her husband turned up dead, right?
Are you asking me to assume what Jason would think?
Well, I'm asking you, isn't it likely that Jason would put you as a suspect since he knew that you were involved in an extramarital affair with Sabrina?
That would certainly seem reasonable.
Because that's what the police immediately came to that conclusion, right?
Seems they did.
In fact, they asked Sabrina about it the first night the night Robert was killed. Right?
Okay.
Well, she talked to you about the conversation she had with the police, right?
Yes.
And she told you that they'd asked her about her and Rob's relationship the night Robert was killed. Did she not?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence.
Assistant.
Did Sabrina tell you that the night that Robert was killed, the police asked her about her relationship with Robert?
Objection assumes facts not in evidence.
Oh, you can answer.
I believe she did mention that they had asked about the status of her marriage.
And they specifically had asked her whether or not she had been involved in any extramarital affairs the night that she was told Robert had been killed. Right? She told you that.
Yes.
So if you're shortly before you were planning to do this poisoning, it was discovered that by Robert that you and Sabrina were still involved, and Jason was aware of it, and shortly thereafter Robert were to die, then you would be an immediate suspect, right?
In retrospect, that certainly makes a lot of sense.
So really, if you were the suspect, the police would first be going after your records, as you were going to be the primary suspect, right?
I'm not sure how they would conduct that investigation.
Well, you've had training in investigation, sir, right?
A little.
And you're an intelligent man, right?
I'm caught.
You finished high school when you were 17. You have an AA degree or AS degree by the time you're 18. You began your college courses at age 12. Would you say that you have a fairly decent intelligence, sir?
I was privileged to be educated pretty well.
Yeah. And you're a pretty organized and meticulous individual. Would you not agree?
Evidently.
Well, you note everything, right? Constantly.
Seems that way.
Would you not agree that if shortly after Jason Bernatine and Rob Limon knew that you were involved with Sabrina, that you would be an immediate suspect?
I'm sorry, could you ask that question again?
Sure. In April of 2014, I'll modify that. From March and April of 2014, since Rob Limon and Jason Bernatine both knew that you were involved in an affair with Sabrina Limon, that if he was poisoned in April of 2014, you would be an immediate suspect.
Certainly now that seems very, very clear, yes.
Okay. And it would also make sense that if you're the immediate suspect, then they would tend to go to get your phone records, right?
Certainly.
And those phone records would show calls to Sabrina's cell phone, her own personal one, right?
Well, within the confines of our prearranged plan, there would be no communication between her phone and my phone. If they were to query my phone records, there would be some communication with some unknown number that's not hers. It would have been her burner number.
Sir, answer the question. Did you not realize that they would get your records, which would show calls made to Sabrina's home and to her cell phone?
If they were to investigate.
In March of 2014 and April of 2014, sir.
In March and April, certainly they would have found my phone records, yes.
Okay. They would have found your phone records that showed calls to Sabrina's home, right?
Yes.
And calls to Sabrina's personal cell phone, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, we know now that they actually got call intercept of your conversations between Sabrina on your personal phone and on the throwaway phone that you gave to Sabrina. right?
Yes, sir.
And if they were listening in on your personal phone in March and April of 2014 or May of 2014, then they would have heard the calls between you and Sabrina and be able to identify what number she was calling from, right?
Yes, sir.
So wouldn't it have made more sense to get two burner phones, one for you and one for her, that don't trace back to either of you?
As with many places in the course of this crime, there's plenty of things that would have enhanced the secrecy of it or decreased the likelihood of getting caught. Yes, that would have made more sense from a criminal perspective.
Well, that's what you were going to be, right? You're going to be a criminal. You already made the plan to kill her husband, right?
I was certainly a part of that plan, yes.
1:30. Remember not to form or express any opinion or discuss the case. We'll see you all back at 1:30.